Welcome, everybody. I'm Mike Honeycutt with Corero Network Security. I'm the product marketing manager here today. And I'm once again joined by Vadi, our senior solutions architect. Raj, welcome back for part two of this series. Thanks for joining us again.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you for having me on the call. And yeah, let's get going.
All right. Well, look, last time, just as a recap, we went over layer seven. You went through uh, the whole 3 through 7 comparison. You kind of went into a deep dive. Today, though, the title is From Complexity to Clarity, Multi-Tenant Layer Protection Without the Overhead. So I'm going to ask a few questions and we'll dive right in. Sound good?
Sounds good.
Awesome. All right. So first, let's just start with, the challenges of existing layer seven solutions out there. If you could kind of go into cloud, on-prem, and sort of maybe tie it into the recent incidents that we've seen in the news recently.
Yeah, absolutely. So typically, when we talk about layer 7 protection, what it really means is application layer protections, right? What is an application layer protection? Last time, if you recall, we went a little bit into what the application layer is, what do these layers mean from an OSI perspective, TCP/IP, etc. So primarily, again, this is within the data stream of the application, right? So when you go through a browser and you're requesting certain objects like a page or a video, whatever it is that the page is constructed with links to, right? And so when you load that page, you're making requests to the server to send you those. Now, that same request method, and with HTTPS, you could also actually push data towards the server. Think about if you want to upload a file, right, onto Google Docs or something, that's actually a type of a request where you're telling the server, I have data to send to you. Now, since these servers, on the back end, they have other things that they interface with, databases, this, that, and other things. Now, this becomes a surface that can be attacked with malicious requests. Now, obviously, it's not something new. This exists, right? And there are solutions today out there. Some of these are available purely as cloud solutions. Some are available as on-premise or within your VPC kind of solution. And generally speaking, these tend to be, in principle, they are kind of like reverse proxies. I should probably say kind of. They are, reverse proxies. And what does that mean? That means essentially your security application, whether that be on your on-premise application, a cloud service, etc., functionally is terminating that incoming connection. Now, when we talk about incoming connection, we're also covering layer 3, layer 4, and then post termination decryption, because it's all going to have TLS and SSL. It's going to look at that application request and determine, is it good, bad, ugly, whatever it is, and then take the action whether to forward it, to reset that connection, and so on and so forth. Now, with the existing solutions, you have cloud solutions that have a variety of protections and things like that. The problem with them tends to be, number one, do you have the control? Do you have the flexibility? Some may allow you to utilize things like a HSM to load your certificates. Some may require you to load certificates into the cloud, which some of the customers may not be too thrilled about, right? But overall, when you rely upon something like a cloud service, you don't have direct control of that particular service or application. You also have things like on-prem solutions. Again, these are discrete appliances that you have control of, but they also tend to come with the additional burden of much more complex management, and how you manage these solutions, going on a daily basis with those, and so on and so forth. Generally speaking, with the cloud, it's become very obvious within the last a few days that major cloud providers, whether they be AWS, whether they be Azure, because there was also an Azure incident had to do with misconfiguration. Google Cloud had something earlier in June. Bottom line is, any of these cloud environments have issues. Now, you could say like, look, Cloudflare is not, they operate their own cloud, but the bottom line is the larger you are, the more complex it is, the more enmeshed these services are. There's always a chance that something can go wrong. And when it does so at a hyperscaler level.
Mhm.
Basically, it's going to affect a lot of solutions. So anyway, I hope I answered that particular question in terms of, where we are with the existing solutions.
Yeah, I mean, and perhaps you can answer, I mean, what we spoke about on-prem and the challenges and the cloud and the challenges, but in a business decision, like why would somebody choose the cloud over the on-prem or vice versa?
Right. So typically, some of the benefits of being, in a cloud is, at least you don't have to manage the infrastructure. You don't
Right.
have to deal with the pains of growth in the sense like, if it is an on-premise solution, then, typically that means you have to add more appliances. Uh, and generally, that also includes licensing costs. So basically, it is, in a way, some complexity at the infrastructure layer, which is
Mm.
what you're offloading when you go towards a cloud solution, right? The trade-off between the two is, in terms of flexibility, how much you can customize, capabilities, and so on and so forth, right? So, but is that kind of like address what you're looking for?
Yeah, I think it's just sort of how businesses can assess what's the right solution for them, and maybe I mean then it's going to lead into
Hmm.
my next question. What is the ideal, like in a perfect world, what would be an ideal solution, and what are the characteristics that make up that solution?
Right. So first and foremost, anything is always a business stuff, right? I mean, you're not just buying a web
Yeah.
application firewall or a network firewall. Everything at the end of the day is to, number one, enable a business. Again, if we go through like the whole, CIA triad for security, typically it is confidentiality, integrity, and basically
Availability.
the availability of the whole
Yep.
thing. So uh, that's the reason, because you need to maintain business continuity, right?
Yes.
And this business continuity can be, interrupted in a variety of ways. Obviously, I want to focus more on our expertise, and typically we're worked with the A part, which is the availability of the service, right?
Hmm.
Corero traditionally has been in, denial of service mitigations, distributed denial of service mitigations, and things like that. But we're also been kind of like getting a little bit more in towards the application space, and application space brings its own set of challenges, right? So
Right.
clearly there is the availability of the applications. When you look at this, for example, I think it is becoming, as we mentioned in our last talk, which kind of set up the platform for this one, that attacks in terms of a denial of service, not necessarily intrusions, not necessarily other things, basically, not addressing the confidentiality or the integrity stuff, but availability within the application stuff by trying to flood applications is one of the challenges, right? Now, these can be also resolved through the cloud services, but again, as I mentioned, clouds are scalar, super scalar, so you can scale. However, flexibility in terms of like your certificate management and the control of having those certificates, does move when you go to the cloud. If we talk about like on-prem, obviously you can do this stuff, but they may also be somewhat limited in terms of how much of these application DDoS they can mitigate. But typically, when once we get to a on-premise thing, most of the instances involve a hybrid kind of setup, right? So you have
Hmm.
some protections in the cloud, which are more suited for the cloud. And then you have some that are on premise, which typically tend to focus more on the integrity and the confidentiality of data and so on and so forth, right? Because you're running a reverse proxy, whenever you're talking about an application security, you get to see both what's being requested, what is being sent, and you can make determinations. Now, having said this, this is complex technology, and typically the challenges for business have been, typically, if you're, I don't care which vertical you're, let's take, medical, you know, uh, the healthcare industry. In the healthcare industry, obviously, their core need is not being cybersecurity experts, right? Typically, as a business, you really want to focus, what's your core things, and you expect, like, your providers or whatever it is, to be able to give you that kind of a guarantee in terms of the application security and so on and so forth. Now, those providers could be your application providers themselves, like whose applications are you running? Epic is like one of those things. Do they have built-in capabilities and other stuff? But I think overall, regardless of that stuff, in general, because of the nature of threats, this is becoming a problem for enterprises where you do have to have a cybersecurity team, experts. And, the problem is there are so many different solutions, security solutions. You need a big team, and this costs you money.
Yeah, I mean, you're diving into sort of the operational burden and the
All right.
sort of the total cost of ownership here, right? And I mean,
Exactly. A
tell me
multitude of systems,
exactly.
because some of these are point solutions. Oh, well, if you want to do this,
Yeah,
it's a siloed architecture, right?
right, right.
Oh, you want to do on-premise, application security, you need to do the WAF. What about network security? No, 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 that's a DDoS appliance, or so on and so forth, right? So I think following up on your ideal solution, right? Number one, what do we see? We see like there's a variety of different solutions, right? But at the end of the day, it's different parts of that same transaction. Whether you want to look at it, who's the bad guys? For example, do you want to accept traffic coming from known bad networks like botnets and so on and so forth? Probably not, right?
Hmm.
Do you want to kind of accept connections that may have, misconfigured TLS layer? Probably not, right? So there's these technical aspects to it. But on the other hand, here's the thing that becomes very challenging. When you have all these different uh, technologies, and more importantly, if you're a large enterprise or even service providers, because our focus has been quite a bit on service providers. But let's talk about the enterprises. You have multiple data centers. If you're a global company, then obviously it's not only data centers, but different geographies. Everything comes with a different type of security policy. How do you centrally manage this stuff, right?
Yeah.
It becomes extremely complex, even from a security policy engineering perspective. So ideally, it needs some sort of hierarchy in terms of the security policies, right? So, for example, across the world, you may have your own security policy that applies and does not come in breach of any kind of like geographic limitations. Maybe you know what your particular applications are, and you're going to block anything else that doesn't apply to your particular application needs, right? That's the best kind of thing. It's always allow only traffic that is legitimate, right? I mean, you don't want to accept traffic for ports that you're not listening to, or for application actions that you should not be responding to, right? But how do you make this uniform across? So one of the, if in an ideal situation, right? In an ideal situation, you would have some sort of a solution that addresses challenges at different layers, right? And can also take these kind of threat feeds and other stuff and correlate and push back and into what I would call some sort of like a universal mitigation scheme. So if you're a layer 2 device or a layer 3 device, you only apply those particular parts of that feed. If you're an application layer device, you also look into what is the application side of that particular request, right? But doing this allows a uniform and universal mitigation policy. Most
Hmm.
importantly, today, for example, if the DDoS appliance detects some sort of attacks from malicious IP addresses, does it convey this information towards, like, a firewall or a web
It's a
application
good
server,
point. Yeah.
right? And people will say, oh, but you know what? We have XDR for that, right? Now, XDR is managing another solution. And a lot of times, these XDRs will require your expertise in terms of setting up and creating this stuff. Again, operational burden, total cost of operation goes up, complexity. A lot of times, what we have observed is people deploy these systems in a monitor mode, mainly because they don't want it to interfere with their application production traffic, right? They want
Right.
to get alerted. But here's the problem: a lot of these attacks happen very fast. And you don't have the luxury just to go monitor. And by the time you decide, oh, you know what,
You're
this is really
reactive and
malicious,
damage is already done. Yeah.
it's done, right? And
Yep.
you're going to be down for several hours. Like,
Yep.
even if AWS can be out for nearly a day, and they have some of the most advanced, complex, not just in terms of the infrastructure, the application, the architecture, but even personnel. They have dedicated personnel, highly trained
Sure.
personnel. And so, what then can an enterprise do? So an ideal solution has to take all these kind of pain points, not just simply solving a security problem, but being able to address it in a manner that is practical, that is logical, goes across the different planes in terms of addressing these threats. Easy to operate, right? Easy to operate is always going to be
Yeah.
most important.
I mean, that's an operative word right there. So, like, how do we operationalize what you just said? Is it a unified control plane? Like, how do we put that in motion, what you're describing?
So typically, I would say, if a solution is being architected, it should start off primarily with a means of being able to, let's say, provision application security instances. This could be, for example, a good way of doing these kind of things is like, container environments and things like that, which, allow you to, number one, do scaling within the, your infrastructure or a private cloud, right?
Hmm.
Obviously, you could also use container systems in public cloud. So the important thing here is it could be public cloud, private cloud, it could be appliances if you so choose, right? So this gives you an ability to be ubiquitous regardless of which platform, or infrastructure form factor you have. That's number one, because
Hmm.
everybody has a mix of various things. Yes.
Right.
Second thing is, provide a means where you're declaring what kind of a protection you want, and you can define this for different regions, right? So you could have something where you can delegate responsibility for a region to a region specific security authority. And the global security authority will still, deploy or put out a global security policy, and the regional security authorities can, fine tune it, add their own local requirements or specific policy to that. But here's the thing, right? In a large enterprise, there's many departments, and typically in this whole CI/CD kind of world, where you really want to turn around quick. Nobody wants a bureaucratic response, right? Oh, let me go to my regional security guy X, Y, and Z. So obviously, this has to be something that's API driven,
Hmm.
right? You do want to maintain the hierarchy in terms of a security policy, administration, but you also want to give that flexibility. So from an API CI/CD kind of perspective, local instances or departments or applications, the application can even go much more granular into this particular thing. So the idea would be, let's create some sort of a vessel that can pull information from all of these, things, and with that, now provide a comprehensive security policy enforcement point, draw in with, information such as threat feeds, as I mentioned before, right? These could have something that we learned from the denial of service appliances, because the enterprise may have a variety of edge DDoS mitigation appliances.
Right, and thusly, you're getting more value out of the existing infrastructure that you have, right?
Absolutely, because first and foremost, network data is flowing continuously.
Mm-hmm.
Attacks are happening, as there's plenty of white papers, there's plenty of articles about it. Attacks are continuous. They don't take
Mm-hmm.
a break, right? I mean, it's always there in the background. There's always this particular noise. And enriching your security policy with these kind of threat feeds, you know make sure that if it is observed once, it is protected at many points across the world, right? I mean,
Right.
why would you want to accept this traffic and go through the whole setup? So by doing this, number one, you can better utilize your infrastructure. There's a lot of
Yes.
systems today, they will mitigate, but they're continuously mitigating the same threats
So
from
they're
the
not
same
learning.
sources. They're
Yeah.
not really learning.
Yeah.
Why even accept traffic from this particular
Right.
source, right?
And you're touching on the next point that I want to make is really about the scalability of it, right?
Mhm.
And going back to the CIA triad, the availability aspect of it, where it can sort of self heal and learn and
Mhm.
scale this model outward. So maybe you can touch on that as well.
Yeah. So basically, the way we are, I would say this solution should work is should have some sort of built-in ability to self-heal, scale, and generally speaking, most of the containerized services have some such thing like Kubernetes or Linux containers or Docker, where that's part of the architecture, right? And you could even tie it into higher things, whether it is the appliances or the base servers they're running on. Obviously, if you're in the cloud, it's simply a matter of making the right API call to spawn up a new instance, um, if you so choose. But in most of the cloud environments, whether it is Google, you have the Kubernetes services in Google, Azure Kubernetes services, Elastic Kubernetes services, Elastic Container Service. So doesn't matter, how or which architecture you choose. The important part here is not really the infrastructure or how or where you choose to do the scaling, but the ease of use, automation,
Mhm.
orchestration of this stuff. Because this should not require your personnel to be certified in AWS, certified in Azure, and you're just piling on too many responsibilities onto that particular team. Also, today, if you look at it, you have the network team, you have the infrastructure team, you have the security policy team, right? But there is no tool today that integrates, where each one of them can basically control whatever solution you have independent of each other. So that the security policy guy will define all the security policies, right? The infrastructure people may specify things like scaling, adding in new capacity, and they don't need to bother themselves with what kind of security policy, et cetera, to set, right? And
Right.
so the network people can look at and focus more on the network side. Yet all three benefit from each other. Security policies, what has been learned, can be pushed to the network devices, mitigate these attacks right at the edge, right? Infrastructure guys can monitor all of the things, get a very quick view, and be ahead of the curve in terms of managing capacity.
Yeah.
So,
And
yeah.
and thank you for explaining all that. And another thing I want to highlight, because you also touched on it earlier, but I think it's really important, is sort of being vendor agnostic and being able to tap into
Correct.
all of these existing appliances throughout the network. I think that's really important as they're sharing telemetry instead of being locked into an ecosystem. It's really important to have that other model. Maybe you
Right.
could go into, because it sounds like that is the ideal solution. However, many vendors are not offering that or not providing that solution.
Right. So one of the key things is to leverage as much possible as open source for several reasons, right? Generally open source, first and foremost, almost all of the hyperscaler cloud infrastructures do utilize, open source.
Yeah.
Having the open source kind of evens out. You don't have this proprietary protocol that nobody else understands and your vendor will not disclose, right?
Mhm.
Uh, and the second thing is it brings a heterogeneous environment into a more unified, system that actually operates with regards to telemetry, with regards to configuration capabilities, API, if you were to choose to use, those kind of things. So this way, it becomes a comprehensive system rather than piecemeal things and islands of expertise to make it more simpler. And at the end of the day, as we started, is how do you bring complex, clarity to complexity? So, creating something like an ideal solution like this. Now, is there anything immediately off the shelf in the things in the market? I think there are bits and pieces, right? I mean, XDR was a kind of way forward in that direction. Problem with XDR again, it's like, okay, it kind of does this, yet in most instances, you still need to sit down and fine tune it and tweak it and tell it what APIs X, Y, and Z. There's a lot of hand holding. There's a lot of things to get it set up. And as threats involve, you again have to keep going over the same cycle. So ideally, a solution such as this not only should be utilizing all of the aspects and components we mentioned, but should be tied in to some sort of AI machine language kind of repository that will take in all of these threat information, telemetry, etc., and dynamically be able to come out with these threat feeds, indicators, updates, whatever you want to call it, right? So that it happens in real time. You don't have to wait. You don't have to pull
Exactly.
something, right?
Right.
And that's, I think, the ideal goal. By the way, how are we on time here?
We're almost at time. We're at 27 minutes, and I kind of wanted to close this out with, you know, what do you say to the audience today who are watching this webinar, right? And they're looking at this as a Corero webinar, and we're talking about this solution, but they're probably wondering, well, where is Corero in all of this? Where are we heading? So maybe you can talk to what our plans for the future is, why we're talking about this today, and why we realize that this is a need.
So again, I think the key thing is the reason that we are also talking about these pain points is because number one, people are experiencing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Corero is looking at a solution that is going to be architected based upon some of these points, right? Because that's really the key. The key is there are plenty of solutions today. Does Corero want to go just build an WAF? No, there is no value to that. However, if we were to unify, merge all of these things, so think of it as an XDR, think of it as DDoS, think of it as application security, think of it as bot mitigation, and
Mm-hmm.
when you combine all of this and you have a unified way that is scalable, that is designed and architected in a hierarchical manner, not only for the deployment and infrastructure, but also from a security policy perspective, right? Where it can be additive security policies at lower layers that will add on to the global and so on and so forth, right? And, kind of make it such that why open source, right? Open source, number one, makes it easy. And by the way, even from a security perspective, I think obscure security through obscurity is not, in my opinion, something that holds out. So I think number one is build and make this playing field very even, integrate with as many third-party appliances beyond what Correro's own enforcement points could be. I mean, today, as we are aware, we can integrate with Juniper routers. We can integrate with a variety of other routers. For Juniper, we have some special integrations for other routers. We can still function, right? We are
Right.
not and leverage their existing infrastructure. So similarly, we want to take that same kind of approach and utilize this to number one, lower the total cost of ownership, be able to scale across enterprises or service provider markets. For service provider markets, I will even say that this provides a very good way of increasing their revenue stream, right? For enterprises, it gives them a way to operate and manage the solution at scale across various different departments without having to create a bureaucracy.
Yeah, you nailed it, and you actually nailed. You're going into one of the key aspects of part three that we'll discuss how you can turn layer seven into a revenue stream, right? So adding on to
Absolutely.
that protection as a service model that we already offer today with our DDoS protection as a service. So offering providers another path to revenue. But Raj, any final thoughts as before we close off today? Anything that you want to leave our viewers with? Any parting comments?
I think like, basically I would, say in terms of maybe sort of like a recap, right? It's like, obviously it solves some of the challenges in terms of web, this ideal solution, right? It is
Yeah,
across various different layers, but the key thing is it looks at operational efficiency. It automates, orchestrates all of these things, utilizes AI and machine language where it is actually beneficial to the whole environment, right? Without having to add towards, having to deal with the complexity of all of these things. Makes it a very simple, policy driven kind of capability. That I think is the real key. I mean, to boot, if for example for service providers, they could choose to provide managed services with this stuff, right? That
absolutely.
also adds additional revenue stream. For enterprises, they can offload that burden towards a managed service, whether it be through Corero, through its service providers, partners, etc. Again, bringing operational efficiency for managing the solution, right? And kind of making it simple. But if they choose to do it on their own too, it would certainly be a lot simpler than a mishmash or a siloed architecture of a variety of different vendors.
Yeah, you nailed it. I mean, we'll certainly be happy to partner with your organization and manage it for you, but it's easy to begin with, right? But if you want that expertise, that extra layer of knowledge, we're happy to white glove it. Excellent point. Well, Raj, thank you so much for your time today. It's always great talking with you. And I look forward to episode three here in a few weeks, where we'll talk about again turning this into a service model and continuing the conversation. But thank you, Raj,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you very much, Michael. Thank you for the opportunity. Take care.
and take care. Bye bye.